Think African stories and you probably picture folktales. But what if I told you that those stories are just the tip of an iceberg? An iceberg of dynastic histories, war memories, legal precedents, and political satire. What you were never taught about Africa is that stories were not just entertainment. They were power. Imagine kingdoms where the only history books were human beings. Royal griots in West Africa, for example. They legitimized rulers by reciting ancestry, conquest claims, sacred origin stories. Storytelling was directly tied to power. That's why colonial powers targeted it. Oral tradition in Africa is everything. Folktales, of course, but also praise poetry. Epic narratives. Genealogies stretching back centuries. Proverbs that encode generations of wisdom. Across the continent, stories were tools. They educated children. They preserved lineage and collective memory. They transmitted laws and ethics. They explained origins and migrations. They recorded political authority. Before European contact, before written records dominated, these stories were history. We are talking about the Mali Empire, Songhai, Asante, Zulu, Buganda, the Ethiopian imperial traditions, the Hausa city-states, Congo, Yoruba historical memory. All preserved through voice, through performance, through community. But here's the thing, when these stories are written down, or even turned into podcasts, something is lost. The call and response, the musical cues, the audience participation, the drum accompaniment. All of it fades. A podcast preserves the content, but loses the original form. And that brings us to the colonial era. For a long time, colonial administrations dismissed oral historians as unreliable. They privileged written European records. The result? Written colonial archives were treated as official. Oral memory was dismissed as a myth. African historical authority was undermined. Missionary schools often actively suppressed local stories. They were viewed as pagan, primitive, superstitious. This created generational breaks in transmission. The impact is still felt today. This is why projects like African Children's Stories, a website promoting reading culture in Africa, are so crucial. They preserve indigenous languages, local moral systems, naming practices. They keep culture alive. But there's a new chapter being written. A digital chapter. Podcast. Platforms like the African Narratives podcast, which states its mission is to tell the African story from the perspective of Africans. Or African Stories on Spotify, aiming to archive African folktales. Even academic initiatives like the Journal of African History podcast are part of this wave. Why is this important? Because podcasts democratize access. No expensive books required. Accessible on mobile phones, perfect for diaspora audiences, easy to share. In Africa, where mobile audio access often surpasses long-form print, it's revolutionary. And it's more than just convenience. It's about reclaiming narrative authority. It's about countering colonial narratives that reduced African history to European contact, framing Africa as without history, ignoring African agency. It's what Desmond Latham is doing with his History of South Africa and History of Africa podcast, by telling these stories in an accessible way. So, the next time you think about African stories, remember that they are more than just tales. They are living archives. They are acts of resistance. They're a bridge to the past and a blueprint for the future. It's time to listen.